Okay. All right, and we're live. Hello, everybody. I'm going to have Waylon Lewis join me on here in just a moment, the founder of Elephant Journal, for an awesome interview about Buddhism and being of benefit. And I'm just going to wait for him to request to join. And meanwhile, I will pin the title, Buddhism and Being of Benefit. I'm so excited for this conversation. He has so much wisdom to share with all of us. Okay, pinning that comment, Elephant Journal joined. And we're going to add as moderator. All right, slowly getting this technology thing figured out. View request, go live with Elephant Journal. Okay. For those of you who don't know, Elephant Journal is, I believe, the largest online mindfulness magazine. It's incredible, such an amazing resource. And Waylon, my dear friend here, is the founder of it. And I'm so excited to have you on here. Hey, Way.
Hey, my phone is over here, my laptop's here, so I might be a little bit, feel like I'm in Star Command of some like space ship.
Yeah, we try to do both so we can upload it to YouTube afterwards and people can watch it later. All right. Hi, everyone who's joining. So today we are going to be diving deep into Buddhism and being of benefit. And the reason why I asked Waylon to have this interview is because when I think of Waylon, I think of being of benefit. I think of being socially responsible, being environmentally responsible, being an incredible citizen and contribution to the world around him. And I'm always curious to see how Buddhism and the philosophy that you've created, your personal philosophy and the Buddhist philosophy, inform your view of the world. I see you as somebody who constitutes yourself as your community, right? You see yourself as so much bigger than the singular I that most of us relate to ourselves as. And I wanted to have you on here to share some of that wisdom with us and see if there's ways in which the Buddhist philosophy can enrich our lives and empower us all to be more of benefit in our communities.
I'm here for it. I love it. That's my favorite. Like when I think of Waylon, I feel like I'm always grumpy about environmental stuff, particularly, or we're both vegan, or, there's so many injustices going on in the world all the time. So it's so nice to have that association. At least you're being polite in public about it. So I'll take it. Thank you.
Well, when I think of Waylon, I also think of lovingly calling people out for where they are not being responsible. Yeah, I tell him often, he's the little voice in my head that's saying, do you really need to do that?
I actually, so many people say that, and I'm always like, and then I'm so grumpy in response. I'm like, it's not about me. It's about, you should care about plastic or composting or whatever on your own.
Yep. Yeah. It's not about you, and you are the internalized voice in my head that tells me that I can do better and I can be better. So thank you for that. And also.
And then I'm going to visit my mom on Monday for 20 days. And when I hang out with my mom for longer than like 15 minutes, she starts talking about, some eco thing in the garden. Like, so she will pluck trees out of lawns. You know how a tree will grow up out of a lawn? She'll take it home, plant it, grow it into a tree, give it away for everyone's birthdays. I'm like, no wonder. Like, she's such a weirdo. This is where I get this stuff,
That's amazing. Keeping it alive, passing it down from generation to generation. Okay, so I have a long list of questions that I wrote out because there were so many things that I wanted to cover and so much of your wisdom that I want to share. So I'm going to try my best to stick to the list of questions, although we are known to digress when we have conversations. So that is welcome as well.
That was very polite of you. I am known to I said regress in my mind, but digress.
Yeah, we both have a little bit of ADD going on, and it's okay. It's great. It's part of being creative.
I would call it, everything's interconnected. And if you're going to talk about one thing, you think of 4 other interesting things. Who am I to just pursue that one thing?
Yep. Yeah, got to share them all. All right.
Yeah.
So question number 1, from a Buddhist perspective, what makes something immoral? So from a Buddhist perspective, is morality something that's a relative, that is dependent on the culture, or is it something that's absolute?
Yeah, I don't have marijuana, and I'm not like staring at like a Bob Marley poster in my college dorm. So my philosophical hat isn't totally on right now. But what I would say is, Buddhism, I don't think, at least the Buddhism I grew up with, and I would say none of this is my wisdom at all. I just was taught things. And then from a Buddhist point of view, you have to connect with it and kind of digest the wisdom you're being taught, or you can reject it or criticize it. And I love that about Buddhism. You're not supposed to just swallow stuff whole. You're supposed to question it, find if it meets your experience, and practice it. So in Buddhism, philosophy is not that important. It's about half of what we do. That is very important. 50% is a lot. But the other half, which I don't want to ignore just because we're talking on a video, is meditation, is practice. So it's not important to like philosophically argue and ignore practice. And then, you know, the whole point of it is to be a benefit. So once you've done those 2 halves, you've kind of baked the loaf of your ego in the oven. You then want a third, it's just sourdough life, of course. That didn't work out, that analogy. But I do love baked bread. So I would say Buddhism isn't big on morality, but Buddhism is big on, because morality to me has a little bit of a Judeo-Christian connotation of like, this is good, this is bad. But we don't want to, you know, and we want to be kind to people, and we want, but it's more complicated than that. You're a dear friend. If I'm doing something awful for myself or to others, kindness could mean you are being critical and being hard on me, right? So we want to be honest, we want to be truthful, and we want to be helpful. That's the may it be a benefit thing. We want to use our life. And I don't think this is uniquely Buddhist. You know, this is in Robin Williams' Dead Poets Society. You know, we want to use our life to contribute and make things a little bit better and kinder. There is a lot of suffering, Buddha's first noble truth, in this world. And, you know, while fundamental suffering isn't going to go away, can we ameliorate that? Can we ease? Allen Ginsberg, the great Buddhist poet, very famous, had a beautiful little phrase. He said, to ease the pain of living, everything else, drunken dumb show. And what he meant by drunken dumb show is like, it's just BS. It's just noise. To ease the pain of living.
And what happens when the things that we're doing to try to ease our pain of living result in suffering for others?
Then that wouldn't be, in your term, that wouldn't be a moral path.
Is there a way from the Buddhist perspective that we can distinguish between what is right action versus what is wrong action for ourselves without following tenets? Is there a way that we can utilize our emotions or any sort of internal feedback to distinguish right from wrong for ourselves?
Yeah, again, I think right and wrong are a little bit like confusing for a lot of people when they hear that. They hear like,
yeah,
you're a bad girl, you're a good boy. Any of that.
So maybe
stuff.
being of benefit versus not being of benefit.
You know, there is an ethical, I think I'm more comfortable with the word ethics or ethical than moral, because moral has a very like patriarchal, like Old Testament sound to me. But and semantics, to be clear, are, you know, how to define words, and we want to be very precise with the words we're using. Trungpa Rinpoche, my parents' Buddhist teacher, would use words and redefine words all the time. He would talk about how he was using a word like loneliness, because he wanted to be really precise about how people interpreted that. I think Martin Luther King did the same thing when he talked about love. He said, love isn't love unless it's active love. So let's be really clear what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think generally right action is, you know, it depends what context we're talking. If we're having lunch together, like we had breakfast the other day, and I'm being rude for no good reason, that's not a right action. If I'm being rude because you are causing yourself pain or causing your family or your loved ones pain, and you're not listening, sometimes the tough mother love, you have to try to break through someone's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not being rude because you enjoy being rude.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully,
mm-hmm.
that wouldn't be right. But we're all neurotic. We all have, you know, the three poisons, like passion or craving or attachment, aggression, and ignorance. So if you're rude to me or I'm rude to you, that also doesn't mean I'm a bad person or you're a bad person. It means I'm a neurotic person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm caught up in my ego or my confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all that, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
You also were talking about enlightenment. So it all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So from the Buddhist perspective, there's no such thing as objectively right or wrong action. What matters is the intention behind the actions, and whether the intention is with love, the intention is to be of benefit, right? So how can we...
I don't think you can say there's no objective right or wrong, but like, you know, my mom, I think this was actually Trump Rinpoche again, but it's really good to kill someone. That statement sounds wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it absolutely bad to kill somebody? From an absolute truth point of view, I don't think you can make that statement.
Mm-hmm.
If I had the opportunity to go back in time and kill him, a very easy example, I would not hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
So context always matters. So it is a relative thing,
Mm-hmm.
but I think on an absolute level, we want to be kind.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be responsible for our own actions.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be present, not caught up in our blah, blah, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And I think the crux of this conversation is, how can we use Buddhism, or really any philosophy, as a guidepost, as a compass to help us live lives that are of benefit? And there's so much nuance in that. So what I'm getting at is, I think a lot of people shy away from any sort of religion because it's become so conflated with dogma, with these very black and white notions of right and wrong. And a lot of people in this day and age don't jive with that anymore. So does Buddhism offer us something different, where there's not any, you're like, no, there's not anything external that's being imposed upon us, but rather it's a system for how we can find our way and use it as a compass for assessing for ourselves what is right and wrong action, and looking deeper within to see really what our intentions are, and having more self-awareness.
Yeah, so Buddhism definitely is different. It's a non-theistic religion.
Mm-hmm.
So people often say, is it a philosophy, not a religion? People like to say that. I think there's truth to that, but it is a religion.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back 2,500 years, blah, blah, blah. But there's no gods particularly. You're not worshiping. There isn't really dogma, because there are teachings. The Dharma means teachings, but or truth. But one of the teachings is you should question it. Mm-hmm. You should find it in your own experience. Mm-hmm. The Dalai Lama has a great quote where he says, if Buddhism and science conflict, let's go with science. Mm-hmm. So basically, like, you should question things. You should, and even science has questioning built into it, right? Mm-hmm. But where I don't think is different is, here's the bad news. For people who love to hate religion, you could be atheistic and have your atheist club, and there could be corruption in the atheist club. The treasurer could steal the money. There could be sexual assault in the atheist club. There could be abuse. Or less dramatically, there could just be a bunch of neurotic people sitting around in chairs hanging out. Mm-hmm. So any community, like, there's this great quote in one of my favorite movies. This lady says to Cary Grant, she says, "Why is life so hard?" And he turns to her with a smile and he says, people. Like, we've seen it lately, like with the Me Too movement last 5 years or whatever, with Boy Scouts, government, businesses, restaurants, religions, the Catholic Church, like abuses in every strata of society. I'm not trying to like take this in a different direction, but people who are saying religion is evil, you're painting with too broad a brush. I think what you mean is being being forced down the throats of children, particularly who aren't taught to retain their critical intelligence, and then abuse within that society. That is highly problematic. So Buddhism is better in the sense that it encourages people to question, although some other religions do that. But it's just as bad as all of them in that humans are involved. Yep. And we're fallible, we're imperfect, we're selfish. And that's what Buddhism addresses, luckily.
Yeah. And Buddhism, I know, is considered the middle path, and I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I have some sort of sense of it being midway between nihilism, which is nothing matters, nothing is sacred, versus the belief that God is everything, and God is this being that has the one truth. And Buddhism, I see as presenting a middle option or a third option that's saying, how can we not enforce structure upon people, which is kind of coming from the belief that people cannot discern for themselves what is right or wrong. And how can we also guide people enough that they're supported in developing that discernment within themselves, right? So how does Buddhism provide that middle path, or what do you see is that which Buddhism has to offer that maybe the two other extremes of the spectrum don't?
Well, first of all, the Dalai Lama would say, and every Buddhist worth their salt would agree with this, would say, we're not trying to convert anyone. So if any of this ever sounds like a sales pitch, we don't care, join or don't. Going with the personal discernment, like you should decide. But the personal discernment is, like Suzuki Roshi has a quote. He says, "It is wisdom which is seeking wisdom." So often, like, Buddhist teachers, it's like a cliche in my community where you'll be like, "Hey, do all people have Buddha nature? Or are we all basically good? How can we be basically good if we do all these bad things?" And the teacher will be like, they'll pause, they'll be really relaxed, they'll be like, "What do you think?" Because as teachers in the Buddhist community, we're actually taught, don't be the average mediocre white guy. Like, actually listen and elicit their own wisdom is seeking wisdom. So they actually have the wisdom. Everyone is basically good. Everyone has Buddha nature. That doesn't mean that people aren't incredibly selfish and sometimes evil and do awful things and all that. And we can talk about human nature if you want. But I think, I don't remember what we were talking about. But I think, the discernment is key. You should always be curious and always be critical. And as you know from being my friend, it's annoying. I mean, I get sick of being me. It's really annoying to care, and it's really annoying to be critical, and it's really annoying to ask questions. But the side benefit that you get when you are that way is the middle path. Is you don't turn out to be like a MAGA racist extremist nut in Instagram comment, and you don't turn into a self-righteous, liberal hater in Instagram comments. It doesn't mean you're a moderate. That's not what the middle way is about. But it means that you discern, that you look for the truth in any situation.
But how do we find that? Because I don't think reason is totally the way, right? There's definitely blind spots that reason leaves out, nor do I think that emotion is totally the way. Because, for example, there are people who think that it's okay to slaughter an animal even though there's other options for ways that they could eat without slaughtering that animal, but they say it's okay to do that. There are some people that say it's okay if you set a good intention for the spirit of the animal passing on. It's okay if you pray over the animal. There's all sorts of ways that
Like
we rationalize things. It's like what? Thoughts and prayers for gun violence?
For gun violence. You're like, the animal may not deeply appreciate your praying and your intent, considering it's been tortured and murdered for you.
Right. So my point is that for you and I, that would not be something that's ethical, yet there are lots of people that for whom it would be. So I don't think that rationality is really a good guidepost there, nor do I think that emotions necessarily are. So how do we discern for ourselves?
Well, I think, that might be where meditation comes in. When you meditate forever, you get way less attached to your own opinion. Like, I'm actually vegan because I wasn't attached to my opinion about food. I was pretty attached. I loved sushi. I loved hamburgers. I loved bacon, whatever. But when I learned certain things about, do I need it? Does it cause pain and suffering? Is it related to climate change in a bad way? Is climate change urgent? Notice all these things are questions. And when I found out, when everything started coming up, like the answer cube, you're shaking the answer cube, and you're like, everything's really bad. You're like, oh, I don't want to be really bad. I want to be a good person. So I think I love how you phrase that, because I actually think the heart is often a really good guide for things. And emotions is a bit different than the heart. The heart is sort of like, both you and I have conservative fathers, but we love them. So the heart enables us to connect on a heart level with them and dialogue and educate one another. My conservative father educates the heck out of me. He makes me go back and question my own ideas and research and learn more and come back. And doesn't mean I don't disagree with him. But emotions can be a vehicle for racism and for hating immigrants and for fear and nationalism. Emotions can be really, you're married. Emotions in a relationship can be beautiful and romantic, or they can be like you're arguing, you're having some, huge dramatic argument about the groceries. You're like, what were we arguing about? How did we get here? So I do think, and then the rational thing, I think, is kind of, it tends to be very kind of cold, and I think that can be helpful. Good perspective. It's always good to look at things from different perspectives, but like you said, it's probably not the whole shebang.
So is that assuming that we all have this thing called the heart that responds in the same way? Right. So
I don't think the heart is like a physical thing in the way I'm saying, but just that there's some basic goodness. So in Buddhism, we talk about basic goodness. It doesn't mean that, inside you're going to find an angel floating around. It just means that ultimately human beings want to be happy. And that's a beautiful thing. We like sunshine. We like green leaves. We like water. As you're seeing in Cleveland, everyone, voted for politicians who deregulated the trains. Now everyone, Republican and Democrat alike, are super focused on wanting clean air, right? Where this environmental disaster just happened with the derailment of the trains. Everyone wants clean air. Everyone wants their children to be happy. Everyone wants, clean water. These are fundamental human things. The battle becomes when I think, there's only 8 slices of pie and Brandy's taking one, and Alex is taking one, and whoever's taking one. Am I going to get enough? That's ego, right? Because ultimately, if we all can operate from a place of contributing and helping, we can make sure. I think the stat is something like we grow like 8 times more food than the world needs, and yet millions of people, as we know, are starving. So we're not sharing in the way that we could if we cared and we had some rationality. You do need rationality to figure out systems.
Mm-hmm.
Or
But how do we know? How do we know if it's coming from our fundamental goodness? Is that what you called it?
Yeah, basic goodness.
How do we know if it's coming from our basic goodness? How do we know if it's coming from our heart or it's coming from something else? Like how do we discern that?
My children, who I talk to all the time, a wonderful Buddhist teacher. I grew up around her, and she uses, I think it's the classic Buddhist answer to this question, but she uses the analogy of you're walking along and you could be a Republican or a Democrat or an American or live in another country or old or young or black or white or anything, and you see someone kick a puppy, and immediately, without thinking, pre-concept, pre-thinking, most of us, if we're at all open to ourselves, will be like, oh my God, wait, what? Like, we'll want to stop it. We'll want to protect the vulnerable, weak, cute little puppy. That's basic goodness. It's that simple. The problem is, we have preconceptions. So we think, like from a vegan point of view, we think, oh, puppies that are cows don't matter. Baby cows don't matter. We'll kill them.
Right.
And that's where a lot of vegans try to come from. They try to say, look at what's happening. Because when humans look, tend to care. When we look at Putin's war and the effect in the Ukraine, we have compassion for people getting slaughtered and their lives destroyed, their businesses destroyed, everything we care about. My business, my home, all that is getting bombed and destroyed. We tend to care, and we care about the Russians too. That's the funny thing. We may not, support those who are doing the war, doing the aggression, but we care about peace-loving people everywhere. One of my favorite phrases around Christmas time every year, and I'm not Christian, is "May there be peace on earth." That is just such a fundamental wish. So where do you know it's coming from? I think you learn to identify that experience, and it's not just an emotion; it's a present moment experience. They define enlightenment as you're just present, but you're fully present. You and I, however wonderful you may be, we've never been fully present. Is sort of like the end of the Matrix, where suddenly the whole world is molecules and golden, and you're just like, and you're dodging the bullets and stuff because you're just completely present. That's enlightenment. And the beautiful thing that happens when you're present is you tend to be more empathetic because you're open. You're actually less caught up in your own stuff.
Yeah.
And you're more empathetic both to others and to yourself, which is interesting. We can be so cruel to ourselves when we're not present.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that what we fundamentally are is basic goodness, and there's lots of layers that is filtering that basic goodness and resulting in it coming through less strong or less powerful. And our task is to peel away those layers, understanding our conditioning. So the example of the puppy on the street. Why would we care about a puppy but not a baby cow? Obviously we would care about a baby cow, but for most people it would be a different experience. And that's because of a dominant narrative that we've been fed, which is standing in the way of our heart of compassion. So the way that we realize the basic goodness that we are is by getting out of the way everything that is filtering that. Okay. And then
I love that.
And
it's not just, to be clear, a lot of people love to blame the government or media or religion or whatever. It's not just dominant narrative that we've been fed. We feed ourselves. We may have initially learned it out here in school or wherever, but as you know, I mean, you've written about, befriending your own body or whatever. We feed ourselves toxic narratives about relationships or dieting or self-esteem or whatever it is. And meditation, I have to say, if anyone out there meditates, and meditation is a meaningless word, by the way. There's 8 million different kinds of meditations, some of which I think are awful. So Buddhist meditation, just to be specific and talk about what I know, is there's many different kinds, but they're all centered on trying to wake us up. The Buddha means awakened one, right? So, and we're waking up from our own
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Place, for myself, all I'm hearing is FOMO, FOMO, FOMO. What about me? What about, I'm not present.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not actually being a good friend, and I'm not being a good friend to myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So when we become enlightened, we know it is the experience of being fully in the present moment, not being taken into the past or future by any thought or any distraction, fully arriving, landing here. And
Yeah.
when
You can think about the past and the future, to be clear. You're not just like my dog, Redford, would be so happy to see me even if I was like 8 hours late. And I always admired him for that. But you have the capacity to pay your bills in the future or plan ahead, and you have the capacity to think and have thoughts and consider the past. But you're completely grounded in, it's so hard to define.
Yeah, of course.
But you can experience it. Anyone can practice meditation, and we may not be fully enlightened, but we have glimpses.
Well, so that's what I'm getting at. So if we're not there, which most of us are not enlightened Buddhas walking around. If we're not there, then what we're kind of getting to is that we can't fully trust ourselves, because while we may be completely convinced that we are doing what is of benefit, there might be some hidden payoff or selfishness that's in our blind spot that we're not even aware of, that's actually driving our actions. So if we know that we're not fully enlightened, then what do we do? How do we live in such a way that is of benefit? It's just continually questioning, continually letting go of our attachment to our beliefs, to our concepts of who we are and who other people are. Is that the name of the game?
I mean, again, like the best advice, not again in the sense that I've already said it, but Buddhists are like nothing if not repetitive and boring. Like from Rinpoche, people would always be like, "What about this? What about that? What about this? What about that?" And that was great. And he would go into it, and there's huge Q&As at the end of his talks, But often he would just say, "Sit more." He had a kind of high voice. Sit more. Meditate. You actually have to do it. It's a little bit like, pretend we're not talking about Buddhism. We're talking about basketball. We could talk about basketball for an hour. Both of you and I are coaches in basketball. We know all the plays. We know the history. We know how it works. But at some point, you kind of got to go out and practice. You got to take the kids out there, run the plays, make sure people are wearing like a good uniform or whatever so they're comfortable. And we got to practice. So meditation, meditate in the morning, meditate in the evening, meditate until you're present. And it may not be a transcendent experience, but you'll know when you're present instead of just blah, 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 caught up in that.
And the way that meditation supports us in being of benefit is because it helps us to gain the self-awareness that's necessary to be able to really see our intentions and investigate those intentions.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. I know if I'm being manipulative. I know if I'm being caught up in my own bullshit. Excuse my French. I know if I'm being, like you said, ADD. I know if I'm being distracted or speedy. I may not be able to change in the moment, but I'm aware of it. And I think that doesn't mean that I'm mean to myself all the time, but it means, I think it really manifests in communication. I think, I could say, if I'm talking with my partner or something, hypothetically, I could say, look, this is what I really want. I really want for us to go on this trip that you don't want to go on. But I understand you don't want to. It begins, you start communicating in a more open way where you're acknowledging different things instead of scheming. I think, again, Trump he said, self-deception is the ultimate enemy. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about. The enemy isn't that you don't want to go to Paris with me if we're talking with our partner. The enemy is that I'm trying to manipulate myself and or her to get what I want. And if I can be aware of my own self-deception, maybe I can't change fully,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm speedy. I mean, I don't know if you've had this experience. Sometimes I'm hopped up on caffeine and I'm like, I got a lot of stuff going on and I know I'm being speedy, but it's still hard for me to like settle down and just relax.
Mm-hmm.
But the cool thing about Buddhism is it gives you a lot of tools to, that's why we say that mindful word all the time. It gives us a lot of mindfulness tools to work with ourselves. And we call that discipline sometimes, but it's a joyful kind of discipline. It's kind of fun to be able to practice being present.
Yeah. The way that I explain it to my clients and my participants is I say, imagine that your right hand is your internal state. So your thoughts, your sensations, your emotions, everything that you're aware of happening moment to moment in your consciousness. And then your left hand is who you really are, the self that you really are, which is the awareness in which all of that arises. Most people live like this, which I call reactive mode, which is being identified with and attached to their internal state and trying to control it, which means that we're controlled by it. Because if our internal state's going crazy and we're trying to control it, then we're even more tightly holding on to it, and therefore it's controlling us even more. And the goal of healing or transformation, as I say it, is not to stop the right hand from shaking, but it's just to create spaciousness between right hand and left. So these thoughts, these judgments, these anxieties can still be arising. It's just that we're looking at them rather than seeing the world through the filter of them. And once that happens, then we actually have freedom to choose who and how we be for everything that's arising in our internal state and for everything that's arising outside of ourselves. And I think that's what you're saying is what happens through meditation. It's driving that wedge between who we really are and our internal state, which opens up the freedom to choose. And what I think you're saying is that when there is that spaciousness, then what naturally arises is intrinsic goodness in people.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's pretty good. I think how I would describe it and say, literally in shamatha meditation, which is sort of translated as stabilizing the mind in the present moment, strengthening the mind in the present moment. It's kind of a great translation. You're literally acknowledging all that like right hand stuff. So I want cake. I want a cookie. I hate Brenda. I love Brenda. I don't know who Brenda is. Whatever your thoughts are. Sometimes your thoughts are just innocent, like, oh, that basketball game last night was interesting. Whatever. I should water my plants. I have to work. We have beautiful thoughts. We have ugly thoughts. We have practical thoughts. We have stupid thoughts. We have songs in our head. Usually we don't really even know all that stuff is going on. We're just kind of being driven by it. And meditation is basically just practicing awareness. Come back. Awareness. Just come back. They say if you lose your mind, come back. So you come back 1,000 times. The idea is you're training your mind in post-meditation, outside of meditation, to naturally come back.
Yep.
So I can feel myself getting worked up or neurotic about something, and I can notice it. And then you have that spaciousness, as you just said, to have a sense of humor about it, or actually have a choice. Make a choice. Often we don't have a choice. We're like, I want cake. And then suddenly you're in the kitchen, like eating the cake. And you're like, wait, how did I get here?
Yeah. So can you speak more to what the self is? So if we disidentify from all of these things that aren't us, all of these objects of our awareness, the clouds that are constantly passing through in the sky that we are, then what is that self that we are when we peel back all of those layers?
Well, when you peel back all the layers, you realize yourself isn't separate from anything. I mean, we all have those beautiful moments. That's why people are always saying nature is like so healing, right? Walk around, like this morning was so beautiful and snowy. Walk around. I went for a little hike. Oh, you go walk in nature and suddenly you feel all relaxed and all your problems went away, or you had insights in how to do X or Y. And that's because you're kind of looking outward and you're just being present. You're not feeling threatened. You're just being very present with the snow, the little bits of snow I was noticing that are like perched on the big old bark of the 100-year-old trees. You're looking at the sunshine on the hills. The snowy hills. You're seeing the little dripping of, the snow starts melting. And after 10 minutes or 15 minutes of that, you're like, oh, you actually kind of reconnect or join with this world.
Mhm.
Everything's interdependent. But ego is the fundamental mistake. It's basically defined as you separate yourself from the whole world. So you say, be you. Again, that pie, like I talked about before, that all of us want happiness, and that's beautiful. But then suddenly I think immigrants are trying to steal my happiness, or my happiness is finite because I'm separate. So, I call it gated community spirituality.
Mm.
Like, you're trying to protect your happiness, which is fine and understandable,
Mhm.
from threats. Like the ultimate manifestation of ego is sort of the whole prepper movement. The prepper movement?
Mm-mm.
You get really excited about like storing 50 pounds of like beans and whatever.
Oh, the prepper. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in a basement bunker. And just to be clear to our prepper fans out there, there's like nothing wrong with it. It's actually really kind of fun and interesting and probably practical. But the idea that you can people are always like, Waylon, like during the pandemic, during the Trump years, people are like, Waylon, you need a gun to protect your house if shit goes crazy. And I'm like, yo, at the point where you need a gun to protect your house, which is full of glass windows, none of us live in castles, it's over. News at 11. What are you going to do? Stay up like 482 hours straight? Like, come on.
Yeah.
Like, we are dependent on one another.
Mm-hmm.
That's not socialism to say that. We have to live in a more enlightened society
Mm-hmm.
that supports happiness on some fundamental level for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why if you're Buddhist, you kind of got to care about other people.
Mm-hmm.
You got to care about politics. You got to care about climate change. You got to care about animals. You got to care about, you start caring all the time, and that's annoying. I get really tired of caring.
Mm-hmm.
I've written about that. I'm really tired of caring.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to go to a restaurant and be able to order anything for once.
Yeah.
I would love to not think about private jets and airplane travel and how powerfully it's destroying our planet and how quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to think about, oh yeah, I love Rihanna, without thinking that, oh, she's a billionaire. Illegal, unethical labor overseas, often child labor. Same with Beyonce and some others. That info is all out there, and I'm not trying to pick on them. It's just top of mind because it's been going around Instagram today. And, I'd like to not think about how Instagram is owned by Zuckerberg and all the problems in social media. I would like to just, go move to Vermont, live in the country, and hug a cow and run around and be happy. But the fact is, we have to care. And when we care, we tend to, as someone I just interviewed the other day said, we're open to more sadness and compassion and empathy, but we're also open to more joy and flow and connection. And that's a great way to, given the choice, I will do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So essentially, as we meditate, as we walk the path, so they say, we are dissolving the illusion of being a separate self. And as the illusion of being a separate self dissolves, we recognize our interdependence on all things. We recognize our oneness with all things. And then who we are no longer becomes this me over here, but it becomes the world, my community, the universe.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Because here's the really weird, fun corollary to this. Brandy Tebow becomes more Brandy Tebow. Like the sunflower doesn't just become all flowers, a mishmash. Everyone, as you become more present, you become more fully yourself. Waylon, I love Victorian architecture. I love craftsmanship. I get, the more enlightened I get, the probably more I'll get into Queen Anne Victorian homes. The ones for tourists. I go crazy for them. The more I'll get into zero waste. I become weirder. Like, weird is wonderful. So it's not that we all become like Brave New World and we're all wearing like white uniforms and like talking in a robotic way and we're all part of the one. We're not the Borg here. I think that's what I'm thinking of. We're just a field, a meadow of like wildflowers.
Okay. So it's a paradox where the more we lose our sense of being a separate self, the more we become the self that we are, the true self.
Yeah, I think, growing up, there were a lot of weirdos in the Buddhist community who were kind of amazing, most of them. Some were obnoxious and a couple were awful, but 99% of them were just weird. And I would be like, Mom, like, if Buddhism works so well, why is Ron Barnstone so weird? And that's kind of what she said. It's like the more you go along your path, the more you become, but the more empathetic and caring and open, and you get a sense of humor about your own quirkiness.
Okay. So then this brings me back to, if there's a bunch of enlightened people in a room, are they all going to see the same wrongdoing? Are they all going to register what is wrongdoing, what is right action in the same way?
I think two answers to that. I think yes, like, I don't know if you know the Elders. The Elders was a council of elders formed by, I think it was formed by like Jimmy, who was it formed by? It was formed by Richard Branson. It was like Jimmy Carter. It was all these like Desmond Tutu. It was all these amazing people. And they would travel around the world and go to war zones and hot spots where bad things were happening. But obviously Desmond Tutu has, a way different life experience fighting apartheid in South Africa than Jimmy Carter, than the Irish Prime Minister, who was the first female Prime Minister up there. And so everyone brings their different tools. It's like the Avengers. Everyone has their different superpowers. Yeah, I think the Avengers is a good analogy because you have the common enemy, which is wrongdoing.
But is there objective wrongdoing?
Objective. What do you mean by objective? I think so. I mean, kicking a puppy is pretty bad.
How can we discern that? How can we know if it's right doing or wrongdoing? Because if that puppy were about to maul a child and we were kicking the puppy out of the way, then the context of that changes our perception of whether it's right doing or wrongdoing.
Yeah. Well, first of all, context matters. So why is the puppy mauling the child? Is it actually mauling the child? It's pretty unusual for a puppy. Or are they fighting over a block of cheese that the kid was holding? Where did the cheese come from? Cheese is an injustice. That's a different subject. So yeah, interdependence. And that's why typically, if you want to help a situation, asking questions is a good way to start. If it's urgent, if people are in a fight, like a dog is mauling a child, you want to break it up. But then you want to ask questions. You want to be like, oh, was this kid throwing rocks at the dog? Is the dog a mom trying to protect its, you want to find stuff out. So yeah, I think context matters, but I think, I don't know, I think there's some things that are pretty close to like absolute wrongs, like rape, murder, war crimes, genocide.
But how do we know that those things are absolute wrong? So this comes back to my initial question, which is there a experiential approach to discerning what is ethical and what is not ethical? So not saying, well, we know that rape is wrong because it's a collective agreement that we have, or because it's a tenet espoused by the religion that I follow, but how do I discover for myself? How do I experientially realize what is right, what is wrong, what is ethical, what is not ethical?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is experiential. I don't totally feel equipped to answer that. I think, I mentioned to you when we were talking about doing this conversation that the Buddha had like a list of 6 profound questions that he said didn't matter. Like, are we reborn? Are we, all these profound questions that are fun to think about in our dorm rooms. But ultimately what matters is being kind, is trying to help serve this world. And there seems to be a common consensus, Brandy, across every religion and every culture, that when we do something and it hurts someone else, hurting someone else can feel really good in the short term. You're angry and you punch someone, or you're or you're itching and you scratch your scab.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond the short term, you're like, that didn't feel good. That didn't help.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, so it is experiential, but I think we're also a society and we have a common experiential experience that stealing causes harm. So let's not steal. But there is nuance to that. If Robin Hood is stealing to give to the poor, maybe he's our hero, you know, so there's always context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you know harm only takes us so far, right? Because if my commitment is I'm not going to harm any being on this planet, then I think the thing to do is go be in a cave and meditate and try to move as little as possible. So I'm not harming microorganisms as I'm moving around. So how far do we take that?
I don't think that is the goal, not to harm anything ever. I think the goal is to harm as little as possible and help as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the expression, you got to, very un-vegan expression, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, we're all making a mess of our lives and our planet. But how can we cause less harm? You know, again, air travel. Could we take a train? Could we bus? Could we, you know, can we offset it with a legitimate offsetting company, not some sort of weird scam? You know, that feels good to harm less, generally.
Mm-hmm.
And then how beyond that, how can we help?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've dedicated your life to that. I think philosophy is half the equation, practice is half the equation, but on some level, you feel really good when you're in a groove and you're helping and you're learning and you're growing. And part of feeling good is in ice cream, right? Feeling good is like more profound than that. A little bit more like making love or something. Like feeling good can be really challenging, as we know. Feeling like doing good. I mean, doing good can be leaning into your beatiness, which feels awful. Mm. But there's something powerfully satisfying about growing as a human being that feels good in a more profound sense than just ice cream happiness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And do you think that's the same for every human being? Do you think that there are people who are neurodivergent and for whom it doesn't feel good to grow and care?
I mean, I'm told that that's a thing. I'm totally out of my depth there. I think Buddhism, you know, has been around for 100 years, which is a pretty good spread for humanity. And, you know, like we talk about depression all the time. I remember when I first started publishing Elephant, I wrote an incredibly popular article about like 5 ways to get out of, to not be depressed. And all these people commented, they're so angry at me. They were like, you can't do these Buddhist things and not be depressed, or these Buddhist things won't help my depression. F you, Waylon. And I was like, oh my God, I need to learn more here. And so I looked at clinical depression. I learned more, and then I retitled it like everyday depression. Like there's a common experience of depression that a lot of human beings go through. It may not be clinical, it could just be part of the human experience. Other people do have chemical imbalances, and maybe the advice in this Buddhist list was helpful, but it may not be enough. So yeah, there probably are different, you know, neurodivergent, you know, folks who some of the, you know, up is down, left is right. I don't really know. It could be different for sure. I mean, that's kind of part of the joy though of humanity and the animal kingdom and nature and weather and just being alive in this universe is it's so constantly diverse and confounding and surprising.
And is there really any way to know if we're one of the people for whom down is up and left is right? Is there really any way to know if we're enlightened? Is there really any way to know if we're being of benefit, or are we all just neurotic people who are deluding ourselves? And
no, I think, you know,
do you think that there are people who think that they're enlightened who aren't?
Oh, for sure. I think everyone who thinks they're enlightened is not enlightened.
Okay. So then how do we know? Because there are people who think they know. Hi, Ryan.
Well, if you think you're much greater than me, at least, you know, that's not saying much though. And I called her up and I went through some of these questions with her because I like to check, I like to have a parlay about this stuff. So I'm not spreading confusion. That's part of my goal. I don't just want to be like the wise Buddhist Waylon. I want to actually not spread confusion and hopefully be helpful. And she said, she has some Buddhist teachers who are clearly enlightened. She said none of them would ever claim to be enlightened. None of them. But it was so different being around them. So powerful. It's almost like being around a black hole, but in an enlightened way. There's this gravitas and this power and this joy, and it's very different. It's very surprising. It's a little bit like the whole world is dancing one way, and this one person is doing a different dance.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, it really is like that, because when you're present, and again, it's not some magical thing. I mean, it's kind of magical, but it's not like, it's a very fundamental experience. We all have access to waking up and being present, and that is enlightenment. Yeah. But if you're like, I'm enlightened, I'm a great teacher, that's probably problematic. Not from the point of view of humility. It's okay to say, I am a great coach, I'm a great writer. I guess if I were enlightened and I said, I'm enlightened, and I was just being straightforward about it, and I actually was enlightened, and maybe I had a sense of humor about myself, maybe it is okay. But like Trump Grimshay would say, when you drive past farms, he'd say there's way more enlightened people working these fields than in a Buddhist monastery. And it's a bit of an aphorism, but I think his point lands. When you're present, when you're working in the moment, you're helping, you're doing things, like craftspeople. I really admire craftspeople for that reason. You see a potter working with pottery.
Yeah. So what is the difference between caring and being attached? From what I understand, one of the goals, if there is a goal of Buddhism, is to attain equanimity, which is not being sucked in by attachment or aversion, not letting attachment or aversion sink its teeth in us and make us be not present. And so when we think about being unattached, to me, that's a bit of a paradox. How do we be unattached while simultaneously caring?
Yeah, I think you're so good at this. This is a great question. I think it's not a paradox. I mean, it kind of is. It's a fun paradox, but the two go together like a clutch and a gas, like in a car. It's like, like if I'm dating someone, if I'm in love with someone, right? That's an ultimate example of attachment, potentially, right? I love you. Oh my God. If the love is attachment, it's not really love.
Yeah.
It's excitement, it's fear, it's desire, it's all kinds of juicy things, but it's not love. On some level is I think Jesus was a good example of love. I think the swan, there's something about the swan or the pelican or something feeding its young with its own blood. Love is a really like, I care about you. I think I wrote in my first book, Things I Would Like to Do With You, I wrote, I care more about you than my feelings about you. It's sort of like that.
Yep.
Like, yes, I love you, but if you don't love me, I still love you. And if you do love me, wow, we both love without attachment. Let's get married. Let's seal that deal. But even marriage in that context isn't our attachment. It's more like you're just having a rite of passage around that. I mean, you could speak to that. You just got married.
Yep.
But
yeah, I'm realizing
it's a little bit the opposite. Attachment is like, it's a lot of projection. It's like, you're beautiful, I own you, I want to control you. I only love you if you're mine. I only love you if you're nice to me. I only love you if you don't argue about the dishes. It's very conditional.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I love that. And when we love something, we have to be willing to let it go if that's what's in the best interest of that which we love. Yeah. And I'm realizing that that hour went by incredibly fast, and Instagram is probably about to kick us off. So for anybody who's just joining, this will be for live or for replay on my Instagram and on my YouTube channel. So you can go back and give it a listen to this awesome, powerful discussion. I have so many questions that I wanted to ask you that we didn't even touch on.
We can do part 2.
Okay, awesome. We'll have
so
to.
Fun. You're so good at this.
We'll have to set up part 2.
I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, this was so much fun. Thank you, Waylon. Anybody who doesn't know him, please check him out and his book. It's never too late. Things I would like to do with you. And it's never too late to live a life that you love. It's never too late to love the life of your dreams.
You just found out I have a second book. It's too much to ask you to say the incredibly long title all in the same week.
Oh, I'm making progress.
Sorry we missed comments, I'm sure, but we could do a part 2. And if you commented, you could probably send them to Brandy, and we could try to answer some questions. Yeah,
I would love that. Love to hear your feedback on this discussion and anything you think we didn't cover, any other curiosities that you have in this realm. All right. Well, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brandy.